Hi, this is Peter Montoya, speaker, author, thought leader, and tech entrepreneur. Today, I'll be talking about the Second Civil War. In our conversation today, we'll talk about how to handle political conversations in the civic arena and also at work. Secondly, we'll talk about how you can actually disengage from the Second Civil War. And then finally today, I will also give you the most controversial advice you've ever heard regarding your political life. Stay tuned.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Hey, do me a favor. Send me a note on one of the big 4 social medias. Just DM me and tell us which platform do you listen to us on. We're really trying to find that out. Do you listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts? How do you listen? Tell us. Tell us your favorite episode, and we're going to pick a winner, and I'm going to offer a prize to everybody who participates. So there's going to be a chance for you to win a prize. It's valued about $1,500. So let us know. I want to thank you for joining us today on this episode of Leadership and Loyalty. And let me ask you this question. What do you need to do to up-level your leadership? Well, how about creating strategies for unification? For example, by mid-January 2021, I was speaking with the corporate leaders who rely on me for guidance in creating fierce loyalty in their corporate culture. We were talking about the impact of the political climate. Now, we all know that the rule of keep your politics out of the office has gotten, well, shall we say, stressed, and it's going to continue to get severely stressed. Now, you and your employees could be Republicans, Democrats, Libertarians, Trump lovers, Trump haters, but the bottom line is whatever someone's politics are, if we don't handle them extraordinarily well, things are going to get far worse. So what can we do? Well, stay tuned, because that's exactly where we're going to go on today's show. I'm your host, Dov Baron. I'm here to assist you tapping into the one thing in your business that changes everything by transforming meaning into action. Curious to know more? Simply go to dovbaron.com. That's DOVBARON.com. As always, this episode of Leadership and Loyalty is brought to you by our other podcast, which is Curiosity Bites. Curiosity Bites is the answer to the question, how can we bring people together who completely disagree? This is exactly what your heart, your soul, your mind has been craving. It's your chance to sit in on some real and oftentimes intense conversations with some of the world's most interesting people. We're talking about multi-Grammy award-winning entertainers. We're talking about astronauts, neuroscientists, philosophers, holy people, neurosurgeons, quantum physicists, skeptics, you name it. These are all truly fascinating people that are not doing the usual round of podcasts. So simply go to dovbaron.com and find out how you can sign up for and sink your teeth into the delicious Curiosity Bites. As always, we need your help in staying relevant, so please get over to wherever you tune in and do us a favor, rate, review, and subscribe to the show and share it with everybody you know. If you are a regular listener, big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners, and we are honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. I know you're aware that between 2019 and 2021, the world has gone through some rather significant and often terrifying changes. Companies had to pivot at high speed or go out of business. We had to find ways to keep our people connected, even though they were apart. People were far more exhausted than ever. Many spoke about working not less, but actually more. Stress levels went up, and yet we managed to, at least generally speaking, not kill our employees or not have our employees kill us. To top it all of that, every time you turned on the TV, there was a new scandal. And the novelty wore off pretty fast and nerves went to the edge. Working from home while the kids were on virtual school, there was protests in the street about police brutality, civil rights, and maybe the sense of a civil war coming. There were crazy disputed elections, hundreds of thousands of people dead in the battle over misinformation, disinformation, vaccines, and a whole lot more. Many have speculated that the US is on the brink of a second civil war. However, the bottom line is all those people are either back or they're coming back into the workforce, into your company's culture. So what can you do to avoid creating a corporate civil war? Well, let's find out together, because our guest today is Peter Montoya. Peter is a thought leader, skilled orator, tech entrepreneur, and a successful business strategist. His expertise come from decades of a deep dive into the trenches. He successfully grew his software company, Marketing.Pro, from a 3-person startup to a multi-million-dollar exit, all without partners or investors. He is currently building his latest game-changing tech startup, Urth, and that's URTH, which is on track to transform the social media landscape by providing civil, community-driven platform free of bots, trolls, and misinformation. His newest book is called The Second Civil War, A Citizen's Guide to Healing Our Fractured Nation, was released back in August the 3rd, 2021, and immediately went into bestseller status. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and help me to welcome Peter Montoya! The crowd goes wild, young man.
Thank you.
I'm glad to have you here, Peter. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. As you know, I'm a political animal. I'm very interested in politics. I'm also very interested in history, as well as the psychology of human beings and what makes us do what we do, and how all that plays out in the world of leadership. But in the context of leadership, just to start here, that's where I like to start the show. In the context of leadership development, what is the question that we should be looking to answer that we're not? It's a question that should be like on the tip, from your point of view, it should be on everybody's mind. We need to answer this question, but nobody's even bothering. What is it from your point of view?
The question I think we should be asking is, how can we cooperate better to solve our collective problems? That's the question we should be asking. I think the main question we're asking in the United States right now is, how can we bludgeon the other side into capitulate to what we want?
That's very true. Now, as I spoke about in the intro, during the last few years in this country, actually not just this country, but the world, it's been in turmoil. There's been little doubt that the world needs some new solutions. So let's start with this, because as I spoke about in the intro, you've been a very successful entrepreneur. So you know a lot about starting and growing business. However, this new book is titled The Second Civil War, A Citizen's Guide to Healing a Fractured Nation. So first of all, why should our listeners be reading the book on a subject written by a guy who, and this is in quotes, doesn't appear to have a lot of background on the subject? You know, certainly if you're entrepreneurial, yeah, Peter's the guy, but we're talking about something that is much more depth and more profound. So tell us why should people be listening to you, this entrepreneurial guy, talking about a second civil war?
It's a very, very, very good question. So although I do have a degree in political science, which I was probably 25 years ago, is that when I got my degree? My mother really wanted me to be a politician. I just didn't have ambition or the sex drive for politics.
Right.
So when you have a political science degree, you've only got a couple of choices. You can go to law school, which I had ADHD, undiagnosed, and just didn't have the discipline for it. You can become a bartender. That's your second choice with a political science degree, or sales. And so I went into sales and really dove in deep to leadership specifically. I've been a creature of leadership for the last 30 years. And like you, have read every management leadership book out there. And then as I started exhausting those, The next place I really went was evolutionary psychology. I cannot tell you, I think a good hour of evolutionary psychology is worth an hour of talk therapy. I'm sorry, a year of talk therapy. When you start understanding how we work in our ancient organic minds, it is astounding in how much clearer we understand our human behaviors. So I've spent the bulk of my life either reading about leadership and or practicing and or training on leadership. This book is not, it looks like politics. It's actually a leadership book.
Right. And I understand that, but I mean, and I'm intrigued by the title, as you know, but you know, the people who are going to pick this up are not likely to be picking it up as a leadership book. They're, you know, they are people who are likely to be concerned about the fractures in the nation. Yeah. And, you know, you are addressing those. So let's just sort of take a step back. So if this is about the similarities between now and the Civil War of 1861, which went through to 1865, what do you believe is, what do you believe says that this is potentially a second Civil War in the United States? Because I mean, I'm just going to bring a bit in here. First of all, the right to bear arms, you know, I've said this many times in many interviews. Americans are never going to give up their guns, so you might as well just give up the idea of that. It's a crazy argument, not because I agree or disagree with it. The point of it simply is this: if you read it, you know, I always say I think we should fully give everybody the right to bear arms as long as they're muskets. Right, because you know that was the weapons in the day when it all came about. So you know, get off my property or I'll load my musket. You know, so by the time I've loaded the musket, you know, things are going to calm down a little bit and there's less shooting people. And so that's, you know, that's back in those days. But that Civil War was drawn, I mean, the dominant of it was two things, which was slavery, the argument against slavery. And the other thing was the Industrial Revolution, which was taking place in the North, and the agricultural world, which was taking place in the South. The agricultural world needed cheap labor, and hence the slaves, and they didn't want to give those up. And the North was more industrialized, and they were moving away from that. So there were overtones, which were slavery, and there were undertones, which were economics. What are you seeing now that makes you draw this parallel?
Oh, great question. So let me make a distinction between hot civil wars and cold civil wars.
Thank you.
The Civil War of 1861 to 1865 was a hot civil war where there were battlefields and guys with muskets and cannons and knives and bayonets, and they were slaughtering each other. And 620,000 American soldiers died, and probably another 100 or 150,000 civilians died in that war, which was about 2.3% of the total population. Just terrible, awful, terrible war. And that is a hot civil war. Now, the alternative to that is a Cold War, like the United States had with the Soviet Union for 20 or 30 years. And I would argue right now we are in a cold civil war. A cold war is everything that's not hot. It's any means that's not hot. It could be economic sanctions. It could be doxing somebody. It could be cancel culture, which I would call a mob character assassination. But it's also happening right now. I don't know personally any friend or family member or coworker who has not lost a friendship over politics in the last couple of years. I don't know anybody who doesn't have a strained relationship over politics. And that's what's currently happening. So this is a social civil war that's happening between friends and family and coworkers. We're already in it.
Yes, I agree. So we're already in this social civil war, but using the reference of the original Civil War, you know, the history remembers. Yeah, history remembers Abraham Lincoln as this president, you know, as profound president. There's a fantastic story there in who he was. But is there a leader, from your studies, from your study of political science and looking at the history of this, that was a man who was able to bring people together. Yes, there was a war, but he was able to bring people together. Do you see that leader when you look at the modern landscape? Do you see that leader on the horizon anywhere?
No. And the challenge is that everyone is seen as a political actor. So if you are on the left, you may have some people who you think are unifying, but the right hates them. And the same thing, vice versa, on the right. So we would certainly need somebody who is a patriot first over a partisan, who says, I love the country and I'm not partisan or partial to any political party. And that person is not currently on the landscape as I can see it.
That's a great point, and I fully agree with you, but those people are likely to fall through the cracks anyway in a completely divided reality. I mean, when your position is about being right, and by that I don't mean on the right, I mean about right versus wrong. When your position is about being right, automatically everybody else is wrong. And therefore, one of the things about human psychology is the rule of real. And the rule of real is this: nothing is real until it's real for you. And so, you're a conservative and you're against gay marriages and homosexuality or whatever it is. And then suddenly you find out your son who's in the closet is gay, and suddenly you've developed, you've grown, you've evolved, whatever the term is you want to use. And do I say, well, you're full of shit? No, actually, no. It became real for you. And these things are not real for a lot of these people. And now we're seeing, as a result of January the 6th, even when it's real, it's not real. I mean, there were Republicans who ran away, genuinely terrified for their life, while the crowd called for Mike Pence to be hung. That's not my opinion. That's evidence. Who are now saying there were a bunch of tourists who were peacefully coming through. And I'm like, wow. So that's not to me about Republican or Democrat. That's about reality or denial. So when you're talking about being a patriot versus being a party member, for me, in my study of patriotism and national understanding that versus nationalism is jingoistic. It's my country, right or wrong, Whereas patriotism, good patriots always challenge their country. They challenge their leadership. One of the great patriots in my mind was a comedian called Bill Hicks, who died back in the late 80s, early 90s. And he said, I love America. That's why it has to be challenged. So how do we get past that? From what you've written about and understood in the book, how do we get people? Because everybody, the thing I said is that everybody who marched on January 6th, if you pulled any of them out of the crowd and said, are you a patriot? Every single one of them would have said yes.
Absolutely.
Every single one of them.
Yeah.
They were looking to hang Mike Pence. Are you a patriot, Mike Pence? Yes. Nancy Pelosi, are you a patriot? Yes. So everybody thinks they're a patriot. So, when you say that, that becomes a challenge. Like, how do we get people there, Peter?
That's another fantastic question. So, first of all, I don't have a monopoly on defining of patriotism. No. I have my opinion about what makes somebody a patriot. And that's a large part what I wrote in the book is actually my perspective on what really is the most patriotic thing you can do. Yeah. So here's my perspective is most people think that patriotism really is about pride. So, I really love my country. I'm so proud of it. I love my country. I support the troops. I love my country. I support first responders. I love my country. And it's really about pride. But when you really think about the word love, and you can break love down to a decision, love is also a feeling, but more importantly, love is about action. So you can
Love is
decide
a
you love
verb.
somebody, you can feel that you love somebody, but more importantly, when it really comes down to whether you love somebody is, do you incur a cost that does not benefit you, that benefits them? So real patriotism, sorry, this is my opinion.
Yeah, I got that.
Somebody
That's
coming
good.
back on, who are you to define patriotism? Let me put it real clearly. This is my definition. I think real patriots are willing to do what's in the best interest of the country that might be at a personal cost to them. So let me break down that incur a cost. So every single time you are driving down the road and you stop at a stoplight that you want to wait for 5 minutes while the other people who you cooperate with in society cross the street safely, that's incurring a cost. Every single time you pick up your trash, you're incurring a cost. Every single time you pay your taxes, and you pay your taxes for things you don't agree on, you are incurring a cost for the benefit of the country.
Right.
My personal opinion is I will oftentimes vote for people and policies that don't benefit me, that I think are in the best interest of everybody else. That's what I would like to see more people do. But that, once again, is my opinion. And somebody else might say, the most patriotic thing we can do is commit acts of violence. I disagree with that. It's a very bad idea, but that's my definition.
But again, to push back a little bit on this, Peter, I don't disagree with anything you're saying, but that's not where the country is. Right. So just at balls to the wall, absolute truth is you've got people who are in this right, wrong mode. And it's not about anything to do with middle ground. There's nothing about middle ground. And even the people who seem to want middle ground, whether you've got extreme right, which we definitely have, or extreme left, which we definitely have, there are, I think the majority of Americans are not those people. They're not the crazy woke lunatics who want to cancel everybody and everything for what they said 25 years ago. And they're also not the, if you're not white, you're not right people either. So, okay, that's the people, but the power doesn't lie with them in other than in a vote. And we all know that counts or matters, but I don't know that it's counted much lately. Donald Trump got more votes than any president who didn't make it into the seat, right? It's pretty amazing. People talk a lot about that, but whatever you can argue about who won or who didn't win, Biden won, okay, and he got more votes, but it wasn't by a lot. It wasn't by a lot. So there's clearly a lot of people who are still saying, I don't care about a middle ground. We're right.
Yeah. So to your point on that, I'll give you a couple of one fact and some of the anecdotes. So the first thing is they did a study not too long ago, it was 2019 or 2020, and it turns out that 73% of the political posts on Twitter were created by 6% of the adults. 6% of the adults created 73% of the political posts. And guess what? Those 73% of political posts were not in the middle. They were on the ideological sides. So when people go onto Twitter and they see the political posts, and they basically go, oh, the country's insane, because all that's being amplified are the two other extremes.
I agree.
But the truth of the matter is that on most issues, there is wide agreement. So the middle in America is probably between 70 and 80%, but the only thing that's getting amplified is the 20% of the extremes. Let me give you some examples. So both Gallup and Pew are two of the most respected, nonpartisan polling agencies in the world. And so let me give you some things. In 2020, what percentage of Americans believe in free trade? 79%. Percentage of Americans who believe our country needs immigration? 77%. Percentage of Americans who believe humans are warming the planet? 67%. Percentage of Americans who believe that same-sex couples should have the right to marry? 67%. Percentage of Americans who believe that gun laws should be increased? 67%. So there is wide agreement in the middle, but the only thing that's getting amplified are the edges. Now, here's my personal anecdote. I can't get on national TV right now. So I hired a really good, expensive PR agency who had amazing relationships. They pitched every single cable news channel you can mention, and all of them said the same thing. Either he has to be left, talking about me, he has to be left, or he has to be right. This unity message does not play with our audience, and I could not get booked. So the media is perpetuating this extremist, and we can talk about why in a second. So yes, that is the problem.
Right. So, I mean, that's exactly to my point, because as a student of certainly history and political history, what I know is that, when I talked about there's an importance of vote, but there's the importance of who owns the megaphone, right? And that's always the case, right? One of the things when I just did interviews about Trump, and I said, what, I'll tell you what Trump is a master of. And they said, what? I said, he steals the mic. He's a master at stealing the microphone. Like whatever it's about, you take a knee. That was from the SEALs. It was the most patriotic thing. A SEAL did that for another SEAL. Suddenly it was unpatriotic. Trump took it, stole the mic, and made it about not being a patriot. It doesn't matter. What I'm saying here is that's the observation. So even though the large portion of these people, all the things you just gave, all those lovely stats, I agree, they're wonderful. And that's the truth of what I believe. That's the truth of what my experience of Americans are. But that's not the truth of what's getting amplified. And therefore, the people who are in the middle are feeling powerless. So when we now take that into the workforce, we are walking on eggshells about extreme left and extreme right, even though the majority of the people who are walking on his eggshells are the people in the middle who are the majority. That's the problem we're confronting here at a corporate cultural level. What's your sort of guidance around that? Because, the media doesn't have to come into the office unless we let it.
Exactly. So I've got a very good friend who's a very high-ranking executive for one of the big 4 accounting firms. I think it's 4, right? It's not. Yep. It's not 7 anymore. It's 4. And we were having just this conversation, and he was saying, "Peter, it's basically open warfare here in our company right now." I said, "In the office? They're talking about politics in the office?" He says, "No, it's not in the office. What happens is they go out afterwards and they go to socialize in bars, and then they have political conversations there, and then it comes back and spills over into the office afterwards." Yes. So here's where a little bit of evolutionary psychology insight can really help us, because we've all been told since we were children not to talk about religion and politics, right? So why have we forgotten that advice? Part of the reason was the pandemic, is that we didn't have any of the national events that kind of unified us. We didn't have things like Super Bowls and World Series and NBA finals and Oscars and big movies like, what's the name of that movie? The Marvel movie with the stones, Infinity Stones. Yeah. You would have all these, or Top Gun, we would have, Top Gun hasn't come out yet because they delayed it. So we would have all these, national events that everyone could talk about, because they've all heard about the Marvel movie or Tom Cruise. And on Monday morning, we would talk about that. We've all been stuck at home now on Zoom. We don't have anything else besides all this unbelievable political news. And I'm mortified every single day how more and more things are being politicized. And then we've got nothing to talk about except how we're being pumped full of fear and how much we hate the other side. So going back to that advice, why it's such really good advice to not talk about politics. And I'm going to make some very, very general, broad statements. And if you say, "Peter, this doesn't apply to me," understood. This may not apply to you. Most conversations about politics are not about policy. Most conversations about politics are you on my side or not? We are a herd animal.
Yeah, we're tribing. That's it.
We are incredibly tribal, and we constantly carry around these tribal badges. Sometimes the badges are physical. We wear, a hat or a shirt or a tattoo, but most of our tribal badges are our beliefs. And so we'll have a national news story. We'll have the protests or the elections. And what happens is each political kind of operative side pumps out their talking points. And maybe the talking point is the election was stolen, or maybe the talking point was it was the most secure in American history. We go out with some friends and we go, hey, what do you think about the election? And all of a sudden, all we do is we mimic the talking points of our sides. Now, someone's saying, Peter, no, I'm an original thinker. I have my own thoughts. Okay, you're probably the exception to that. The rest of us start pumping out our talking points. And it's basically saying, if you say the same talking points I do, and you go, yeah, I agree with you, then you're on my team. And if you don't, you are basically an enemy. And our midbrain, that limbic system, lights up just like it did 10,000 years ago when we saw somebody who was not in our same 150 person tribe. Now, thankfully, we are much more civilized now, and it doesn't come to me pulling out a spear and trying to kill you, but my brain still thinks it does. So that's why we get so aggravated and hot. And once you understand that conversations about, this is most people, most political conversations are not about politics.
No.
All they're about is, are you on my team? And if not, I'm going to metaphorically try to crush you through my argument.
Yeah, because the amygdala, the limbic system, the old brain, midbrain, it looks at everything as you're either on my side or you are the enemy. And, one of my best piece of advice to everybody is to say this: the advice you've been given for years by certainly every leadership dingling out there, and every pop psychology dingling out there is surround yourself with like-minded people. Please don't do that. Please don't do that. You will never grow. Mm-hmm. Surround yourself with people who will challenge the way you think, and be curious when they say that and go, I wonder why you believe that. Help me understand, because I don't get that. Tell me what that is.
Like you're talking about empathy, Dov.
Yep. Well, that might be a good idea, but it's certainly a very good idea to come forward. Now, I want to come to a bit more about the book, and I want to look at some of the solutions in the context of the corporate culture. But we're already coming towards the end of this first part of the show. Part one, we're going to be back with part two of the show. We're going to dive deeper with Peter here and talk more about his book, because it is relevant to you in the corporate environment. It's called The Second Civil War. He's talking about a cold civil war, a social civil war. It's a citizen's guide to healing our fractured nation. We're going to be back with Peter and talk about that more in part two, and more about the solutions that we can, go walking through his guide. Before we do that, Peter, please tell our audience where they can find out more about you, your book, and all the other wonderful resources you have.
Very kind of you to ask. You can go to petermontoya.com. So it's easy to remember, petermontoya.com, to learn more about me. I'm a speaker, an author, an entrepreneur. And then if you want the book, it's really easy. It's either Amazon or Barnes & Noble, amazon.com or Barnes & Noble. And you can find the book softbound audiobook, and also by ebook.
Oh, you've done the audiobook too?
Yes.
Fabulous. Okay, great. Well, then easy for you to get a hold of that. Please do so. Remember, come back for part two of this delicious conversation with Peter Montoya, who is the author of The Second Civil War. And we're going to be back with him. So stay curious, my friends. Stay curious. We'll be back in one click.